I never thought that at 77, I'd find the courage to face my own family. I'd always been the one to give in, to understand, to stay silent. The Linda who accepted her place. But there are times in life when you have to decide if you're going to remain a small sapling that bends with every gust, or if you'll finally grow roots deep enough to withstand the storm. I look at my hands as I wait in the reception area of Mercy Medical Center. Wrinkled hands, with age spots and bluish veins that look like rivers drawn on thin skin. These same hands that once cradled David as a baby, that stroked Ethan's hair on feverish nights, now hold a manila envelope with documents that could change everything. Have you ever wondered how long a person can stand being invisible before deciding to show up? How much love can be rejected before you finally say, enough? The smell of rubbing alcohol and disinfectant at the hospital brings back memories of all the times I've been here, hidden away, watching my little grandson go in for yet another treatment. Without being able to hug him, without being able to say, Grandma's here, my love. Today will be different. Today, for the first time in a long time, I didn't come as a shadow. The television murmured softly in the living room while I prepared breakfast. News reports talked about the drop in COVID cases, about new variants, about how the world was trying to recover after so much suffering. It was already 2023, but it felt like the pandemic had left scars that would never completely disappear. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled my small apartment kitchen. Ever since I sold the old homestead in 2020, I'd moved into this modest place downtown. A 2-bedroom apartment I kept impeccably clean, always smelling of coffee in the morning and zucchini bread on Thursday afternoons. Habits I brought from the country that neither time nor the city could take from me. Through the kitchen window, I could see the street coming alive. The baker lifting the metal door of the bakery across the street, the mailman already starting his route, the traffic light turning red, piling up impatient cars. The city never truly slept. It just dozed. I picked up my cell phone, a simplified device with large keys that Martha convinced me to buy when video calls became our main way of staying in touch during isolation. Linda, you need to enter the 21st century. How else am I going to show you my crochet patterns? She'd laugh. The phone still felt strange in my hands, but in recent years, it had become an important bridge to the world. There were 3 missed calls from David. My heart jumped. David never called me so early unless... I returned the call with trembling fingers, spilling a little coffee on the floral tablecloth. Mom. His voice sounded tired on the other end. Ethan's been admitted again. That familiar knot formed in my throat. 3 years since my grandson's autoimmune disease diagnosis, and that knot always appeared, always with the same force. What happened, son? The fever came back last night. Sarah thought it best to bring him straight to the hospital. A pause. We're at Mercy Medical Center. He didn't say, you can come see your grandson. He never did. Ever since Sarah declared that my visits worsened Ethan's condition, David simply informed me about the boy's health, like giving a weather report. Impersonal. Distant. I'll pray for him, I replied, swallowing the words I really wanted to say. Thanks, Mom. And he hung up. I stared at the phone for a few seconds, feeling the weight of all the denied visits, all the birthdays observed from afar, all the secretly paid treatments. The weight of being the invisible grandma. The clink of the spoon against the mug echoed in the empty kitchen as I stirred my coffee unnecessarily. Through the window, I saw the little dogwood sapling I kept in a large pot on the small balcony. I'd brought that sapling from the homestead before selling it, a last piece of the life Arthur and I built together. It was the same kind of tree we planted with Ethan on his last birthday, when they still allowed me to see him. The little trees are the bravest, I told him that day. They have to fight harder to find the sun. The phone rang again, startling me. It was Martha. "Linda, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said as soon as I answered the video call, her image a little shaky on the small screen. "Ethan's been admitted again," I replied, feeling the tears I'd held back finally escape. "Oh, my dear." Even through the screen, Martha's round face and kind eyes brought me comfort. "Are you going to the hospital?" I shook my head. "You know they won't let me see him." Martha took a deep breath, the kind of breath she always took before saying something I might not want to hear. "Linda Peterson, how long are you going to put up with this? You've been paying for that boy's treatment for 3 years. 3 years hiding, as if you're doing something wrong. Martha, you know David, proud like his father. And Sarah, well, Sarah is an ungrateful woman who doesn't deserve the mother-in-law she has. And your son." She shook her head in disapproval. "Arthur didn't raise him like that, I'm sure." Arthur? My husband had passed away 6 years ago, even before Ethan's diagnosis. Sometimes I wondered what he would say about all this. He probably would have confronted David and Sarah from the beginning, with that bluntness that was uniquely his. But I wasn't Arthur. I was just Linda, the quiet widow who didn't want to cause trouble. "I'm going to do something different today," I said, more to myself than to Martha. "What do you mean?" "I'm going to call Dr. Thompson." Dr. Thompson's office was on the 3rd floor of Mercy Medical Center. It was a small, cozy room with a wide window that let in natural light and diplomas hanging on the wall behind his desk. The chair where I sat had slightly worn leather arms, a testament to the countless families who had received both good and bad news in that very spot. "The experimental treatment I mentioned on the phone is the best option for Ethan right now," Dr. Thompson explained, his thin-framed glasses slipping down his nose as he pointed to the scans spread across the table. "But as I said, insurance doesn't cover it, and the cost is—" "How much?" I interrupted, my hands clutching my worn leather purse in my lap. When he mentioned the amount, I felt my stomach clench. It was almost all the money I had left from selling the homestead. "I understand it's a considerable amount, Mrs. Peterson," he continued, his voice gentle. "We can look for alternatives, perhaps a lawsuit against the insurance company, although that takes time. And Ethan. We don't have that kind of time, do we?" He hesitated, then shook his head slowly. Each relapse leaves his body more fragile. I looked out the window, watching the hospital's activity below. Ambulances arriving, families coming and going, life following its relentless course. I thought about the money saved, the plans I had made for my old age, the small nest egg that would ensure I wouldn't be a burden to David when I couldn't care for myself anymore. "We'll do the treatment," I said finally, turning my eyes back to the doctor. "Are you sure? Perhaps you'd like to talk to your son before—" "Dr. Thompson, you've cared for my grandson for 3 years. Has David or Sarah ever asked how the previous treatments were being paid for?" He adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable. "No, they assumed it was that support foundation you invented." "Then there's nothing to discuss. I want to sign the papers now." The doctor hesitated for a moment, then opened a drawer and took out some documents. As I signed, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. I was giving up my security, but for the first time in a long time, I was making a conscious choice, not just submitting to what others decided for me. Mrs. Peterson, Dr. Thompson called out when I finished signing. I think it's time you had a conversation with your son and daughter-in-law. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of disinfectant and stale coffee that permeated the hospital. The beeping of the monitoring machines in the hallway formed a strange symphony with the muffled sound of loudspeakers calling doctors. Yes, doctor. I think it's time for some truths to come out. Room 304 had pastel walls and beige curtains that filtered the afternoon light. I paused at the door for a moment, observing. Ethan was asleep, so small in that hospital bed. Tubes and wires connected to his fragile body, his pale face partially covered by an oxygen mask. Beside him, Sarah typed frantically on her cell phone, her fingers gliding across the screen with agility. She didn't notice my presence until I took 2 steps into the room. When she looked up and saw me, her face contorted into a mask of indignation. "What are you doing here?" Her voice came out louder than it should in a hospital room. "I told you yesterday I didn't want you near Ethan." "Good afternoon, Sarah." I kept my voice calm, though my heart pounded. "I came to see my grandson." "Didn't you hear what I said? You only bring bad luck. Every time you come, he gets worse." "That's not true, and you know it." "I know? Then why does he always end up back in the hospital after your visits?" Her eyes gleamed with a mix of anger and fear. "You and your country superstitions, your prayers, your miracle teas." I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar hospital smell fill my lungs. The beeping of the machines monitoring Ethan's vital signs marked the time between us. "Sarah, I came to talk about the new treatment." That seemed to disarm her momentarily. "What new treatment?" "The experimental treatment Dr. Thompson recommended, the one insurance doesn't cover." She frowned, confused. "How do you know about that?" Instead of answering, I opened my purse and took out the manila envelope I had brought. I held it out to her, and she took it with hesitation. "What's this?" "Open it." With slightly trembling fingers, she broke the seal of the envelope and began to pull out the documents. Bank statements, transfer confirmations, medical contracts. 3 years of financial history that told a truth she had never suspected. I watched her eyes scan the papers, comprehension slowly dawning on her features. Her face lost its color. This can't be true. But it is. There's no foundation, Sarah. I'm the one who's been paying for Ethan's treatment since the beginning. I sold Arthur's homestead for this. But why? Why didn't you tell us? I looked at my sleeping grandson, at his chest rising and falling with a fragile rhythm. The clock on the wall ticked the seconds with a monotonous sound. Because your husband is too proud to accept help from his country mother, and you made it very clear what you thought of me from day one. My voice came out firmer than I expected. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is that I just authorized the new treatment. It starts tomorrow. She looked at the papers again, then at me, her usual arrogance replaced by something that looked almost like shame. You sold everything? Almost everything. Enough to give my grandson a better chance. At that moment, a small movement in the bed caught our attention. Ethan was waking up, his eyes opening slowly, trying to focus on his surroundings. When his gaze met mine, something incredible happened. A weak smile formed under his oxygen mask. "Grandma Linda." His voice came out muffled, almost a whisper. I approached the bed, completely ignoring Sarah's presence. I took Ethan's pale little hand in mine. "I'm here, my little one. Grandma's here. You came." Each word seemed to cost him enormous effort. "Of course I came, and now nothing will stop me from being by your side." His little eyes sparkled for a moment before closing again, tired. I continued holding his hand, feeling his weak pulse against my fingers. Sarah remained standing, the documents still in her hands, watching our interaction with an expression difficult to decipher. From outside the room I heard footsteps approaching, and recognized David's voice talking to a nurse. "He's coming in," Sarah murmured as if warning me. "Good," I replied without taking my eyes off Ethan's sleeping face. "It's time for all of us to have an honest conversation." When David entered the room and saw me sitting by his son's bed, holding his hand, he froze in the doorway. His eyes went from me to Sarah, seeking explanations. "Mom? What are you doing here?" I looked up to face my son. The boy I once held in my arms was now a middle-aged man, with graying hair at his temples and deep circles under his eyes. "Hello, David. I'm getting acquainted with your son's new treatment, the one that starts tomorrow." He frowned, confused. "What treatment?" "Insurance denied coverage for anything experimental." "I know. That's why I authorized it and will pay for it." "You'll what?" Sarah held out the documents to him, her hand still trembling slightly. "David, your mother. She's been the foundation this whole time." I saw the confusion in his eyes as he took the papers. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of machines, and Ethan's shallow breathing. This can't be true." "It is true, son." My voice sounded tired now, the weight of 3 years of secrets finally being released. "I sold the homestead, your grandmother's jewelry, saved every penny I could. I did it all in silence because I knew you wouldn't accept it." David flipped through the documents frantically, as if looking for some proof that it was all a lie. His breathing grew heavier, his face flushed. "Why didn't you tell me? Why hide it?" "Because you wouldn't let me be part of my grandson's life in any other way. This was the only way I found to be present, to make a difference." David collapsed into the chair by the window, the documents scattered in his lap. I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Vulnerability. The same look he had as a child, after breaking something and coming to confess, expecting a scolding that never came as severely as he deserved. "I didn't know. I thought the foundation." "There's no foundation, David. Never was. It was just an old woman trying to take care of her family, even when that family pushed her away." I looked again at Ethan, at his serene face in the medication-induced sleep. I lightly touched his thin hair, feeling its fine texture between my fingers. "But now things will change," I continued with a determination that surprised even myself. "Because I might be an old country woman, I might talk with a bit of a drawl, I might still believe in old wives' tales and good luck charms, but one thing I do very well: fight for what I love." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with long unspoken truths. David looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Sarah had moved away to the window, watching the street traffic below. "And what happens now?" David finally asked, his voice low and insecure. I looked at my son, and then at my daughter-in-law, feeling a strange calm envelop me. It was as if, After years of bending to the winds, I had finally found my roots. Now? Now we're going to do what we should have done from the beginning. Be a real family. Because Ethan will need all of us to face what's ahead. As I spoke, I felt Ethan's little hand squeeze mine lightly, as if even in his sleep he could feel the change in the air, as if he knew something important was happening. And if you can't accept that, I continued, my voice gaining firmness, then I'll keep doing what I've always done, caring for him the best way I can, even from afar. David looked up at me and I saw a mix of shame and regret in his eyes. Mom, But whatever he was going to say was interrupted by Dr. Thompson entering the room. He looked at the scene, the scattered papers, the tense expressions, and seemed to immediately understand what had happened. "I see you finally had the necessary conversation," he commented, approaching to check Ethan's monitors. "You came just in time. We need to prepare Ethan for the new treatment that starts early tomorrow." He turned to me with a gentle smile. "Mrs. Peterson, the nurse has the final documents for you to sign. And—" He hesitated for a moment. If I may say so, it was time for the true hero of this story to appear. I felt the heat rise to my face with those words. I never considered myself a hero, just a grandma doing what any grandma would do. "I'll sign the papers," I said, getting up carefully so as not to wake Ethan. Before leaving, I looked at David and Sarah. "I'll be back shortly. This time I'm not leaving." As I walked down the hospital corridor beside Dr. Thompson, I realized something fundamental had changed within me. For so long I was like that little dogwood sapling on my balcony. Small, discreet, silently fighting for survival. But little trees, when well cared for, eventually grow. They create strong roots, they gain height, and one day, they bloom with such intensity that it's impossible not to notice them. I looked out the corridor window and saw the sun beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the city, a small dogwood sapling patiently awaited its turn to shine. At 77 years old, I was finally learning to do the same. But the true transformation was still to come. The day I signed the papers for Ethan's treatment marked the beginning of a new phase for our family. The awkwardness hung in the air like overly strong perfume. David avoided my gaze in the hospital corridors. Sarah alternated between moments of forced gratitude and uncomfortable silences. The nurses, witnessing that strange family dance, exchanged discreet glances. But none of that mattered compared to the joy of being able to hold my grandson's hand during the long treatment sessions, of seeing his little eyes light up when I entered the room, of finally being present. "Grandma, tell me the story of the little dogwood again," Ethan would ask on afternoons when the fatigue of the treatment allowed for some conversation. "Which part do you want to hear, my little one?" "The part where the dogwood gets strong, even though it's tiny." Sitting in the armchair beside his bed, I'd adjust my glasses and begin the narrative that had become our special ritual. Big trees, those enormous ones everyone sees from afar, they were born tiny, you know? And when they're saplings, they have to fight much harder for a little bit of light. They face shadows, strong winds, heavy rain. Many don't make it, but the ones that resist. Those are special. They grow deep roots, learn to bend without breaking, and one day, when no one is expecting it, they bloom so beautifully that everyone stops to admire them. Ethan would smile under his oxygen mask, his eyes slowly closing as the medication took effect. "I'm like the little dogwood, right, Grandma?" Yes, my love, you are. And you'll bloom beautifully one day. You'll see. In the first few weeks, David and Sarah seemed unsure how to act around me. We were like amateur actors in a poorly rehearsed play, each trying to find their place in this new family arrangement. But little by little, the ice began to melt. It was on a rainy Tuesday in June, when Ethan's treatment completed a month, that I noticed the first significant change. I was in his hospital room, knitting a blue beanie for the approaching winter, while Ethan slept. Sarah entered carrying a thermos and 2 mugs. "I brought coffee," she said, handing me one of the steaming mugs. "No sugar, just how you like it." I was surprised she knew that preference. I accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. Sarah sat in the other chair, an uncomfortable silence growing between us. Through the window, we watched the rain lash against the panes in intermittent gusts. "Mrs. Peterson," she began finally, her voice lower than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about what you did. For Ethan. For us." I continued knitting, letting her find her own words. "I don't know where to begin to apologize," she continued, her eyes fixed on her coffee mug. "The way I treated you. The things I said." "Sarah," I interrupted gently, putting my knitting aside. "I'm not looking for apologies. But I need to give them. Please." Her eyes finally met mine, and I saw they were tear-filled. "I was so scared. When Ethan got sick, I didn't know what to do. I needed to blame someone. Something. And you were there." I nodded, remembering what it's like to be the mother of a sick child. The despair, the helplessness, the desperate need to control something when everything seems to be falling apart. "Fear makes us do strange things," I replied simply. Sarah wiped a tear with the back of her hand. "You sold everything. For him, while I was forbidding your visits." "I didn't sell everything for him," I gently corrected. "I sold it for us. That's what family is, Sarah. It's not just when everything's going well. It's especially when everything's falling apart." She lowered her head, tears now falling freely. "I don't know if I can forgive myself." "Forgiveness comes with time," I said, resuming my knitting. "Like the growth of the little dogwood. It doesn't happen overnight." After that conversation, something subtly changed between us. We didn't become best friends overnight, of course. There were wounds too old for that. But we began to build something new, a mutual respect that hadn't existed before. David took longer. He'd always been that way, ever since he was a boy. Slow to process emotions, even slower to admit mistakes. Arthur used to say he took after my father in that aspect. Stubborn as a mule. The conversation with my son came almost 2 months after the treatment began, during a rare afternoon when Ethan was well enough to be left in Sarah's care, while David and I went down to the hospital cafeteria. "Mom," he began, stirring his coffee without really drinking it. "I've been wanting to talk to you, but I couldn't find the words." "So have you found them now?" I asked, watching him over my glasses. He gave a nervous half-smile. "Maybe. Or maybe I've just realized I'll never find the right words, so it's best to use the ones I have." I waited, patient as only a 77-year-old mother can be. "I failed you," he said finally, his voice choked. "As a son, as Ethan's father, as a man I let pride and weakness stop me from doing what was right." "Weakness isn't failing, son. It's not trying to fix things after you've failed." David nodded, running a hand through his graying hair. "You've always had that wisdom, you know." Dad used to say you could see into people's hearts better than anyone. I felt a pang in my chest remembering Arthur. Your father exaggerated. I just have the patience to wait for people to show who they really are. I wish I were more like you, he confessed. Ethan deserved a better father. Ethan has exactly the father he needs, David. A man who can make mistakes but who loves deeply. The rest you learn along the way. In that moment, I saw my son as I hadn't seen him in years. Not the adult man frustrated with life and its complications, but the sensitive boy who hid behind a facade of toughness. I don't know if we can fix everything, Mom. We can't, I confirmed, reaching across the table to take his hand. Some broken things don't go back to how they were, but we can build something new with the pieces. Ethan's experimental treatment lasted 6 months. They were months of highs and lows, of renewed hopes and deep fears. There were days when the doctors entered the room with grave expressions, talking about necessary adjustments and unexpected side effects. There were nights when Sarah and I took turns by Ethan's bedside, watching his fragile breathing, both silently praying in our own ways. And there was, finally, that November morning when Dr. Thompson entered the room with a smile he couldn't contain. The tests are showing a very positive response, he announced, showing the results to the 3 of us, me, David, and Sarah, gathered anxiously around Ethan's bed. The disease is in remission. Remission. That word sounded like music to our tired ears. It wasn't a cure. Dr. Thompson made sure to make that clear. But it was a significant reprieve, a real chance for recovery. Ethan was discharged in the first week of December. The sun shone timidly as we left the hospital, as if celebrating with us too. My grandson was thinner, paler, but his eyes had regained that special sparkle I had missed so much. "Grandma," he said as David buckled him into the back seat of the car. "Can we go see the dogwood today?" I looked at Sarah, who nodded with a small smile. "Of course, my love. We'll all go see how much it's grown." The dogwood tree we had planted in David and Sarah's backyard had survived well during our months of absence. It was taller, stronger, with bright new green leaves spreading across its thin branches. Ethan, still too weak to walk alone, was carried by David to the small garden where the tree grew. His little eyes sparkled at the sight of the plant. "It got taller, Grandma, like I'm going to now." "That's right," I agreed, feeling an emotion hard to contain. "You two will grow strong together." As we observed the small tree, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. There we were, an imperfect family, full of scars and regrets, but still a family. United by our love for this little being who fought so bravely for life. That night, as I prepared to return to my apartment after dinner at their house, Sarah surprised me with an invitation. "Why don't you stay here with us for a few days? Ethan would love it, and, well, there's the guest room we never use." I looked at her, then at David, who nodded in agreement. "Just until Ethan gets used to the routine at home again," he added. "It would be good to have you around." Something in me wanted to refuse, an old habit of not imposing my presence, of staying on the sidelines. But then I heard Ethan's voice coming from his room. "Grandma Linda's gonna sleep here. Please say yes." And so, at 77 years old, I learned another lesson about growing and blooming. Sometimes, accepting the place offered to us with love is just as important as fighting for the respect we deserve. The following months brought a new routine for all of us. I ended up staying not just a few days, but moving in permanently with David and Sarah. My small apartment was sold, and with the money, we made some adaptations to the house to better accommodate everyone. The guest room became mine, a space just for me, decorated with a few pieces I brought from the apartment and others that David and Sarah surprisingly chose with me in mind. My mother's old dark wood dresser took pride of place, as did the porcelain lamp Arthur gave me on our first wedding anniversary. The transition wasn't always easy. There were days when Sarah and I disagreed about how to organize the kitchen or what seasonings to use for dinner. Moments when David got annoyed when I interfered with a decision about Ethan. Nights when I found myself crying softly, missing my independence, my space, the life I built alone after Arthur's death. But there were also mornings when Ethan would come into my room before anyone else woke up, just to cuddle next to me in bed and listen to stories from the country. Afternoons when Sarah would ask me for advice on recipes or how to deal with the anxiety she still felt when Ethan had a slight fever. Nights when David and I would talk on the porch, reminiscing about his childhood, reconnecting as mother and son. It was on one of those porch conversations, almost a year after the experimental treatment began, that David asked me a question that caught me by surprise. "Mom, do you regret selling the homestead?" I thought for a moment, watching the stars dotting the sky above the city, less visible than in the countryside, but still present. "No, son, I don't regret it. The homestead was made of land, wood, and memories. The memories I brought with me. The rest was just stuff." "But it was your security, your future." I smiled, taking a sip of the chamomile tea Sarah had prepared for us before going to bed. "My future is here, David. With you all. With Ethan. What was I going to do with a whole homestead by myself? Talk to the chickens?" He laughed, but his eyes remained serious. "You always put us first, even when we didn't deserve it." "It's what mothers do, son. But don't be mistaken. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a choice." And it was true. Every penny spent on Ethan's treatment, every moment of humiliation silently swallowed, every lonely night in my apartment knowing my grandson was in the hospital. All were choices I would make again without hesitation. That night, as I prepared for bed, I looked out my bedroom window and saw the dogwood tree in the garden, its silhouette outlined against the night sky. In just over a year, it had grown surprisingly. The gardener who came once a month said it was rare to see a dogwood develop so well in such a short time. "It's because it has love," Ethan replied when the man commented on the tree's growth. "Love makes plants grow?" the gardener asked with a gentle smile. "It makes everything grow," my grandson affirmed with the wisdom only children who have faced great struggles seem to possess. My grandma taught me that. Life found its rhythm. Ethan returned to school the following year, still with restrictions and special care, but determined to make up for lost time. I accompanied him to and from school, waiting patiently at the gate while he insisted he was too big for Grandma to be waiting. But his eyes always searched for me at dismissal, a mix of relief and joy at finding me exactly where I promised to be. Martha became a constant presence in our lives, too. She came for dinner on Fridays, always bringing some new crochet pattern to teach me, or a treat for Ethan to try. It was she who suggested I start writing down my stories. "Linda, you have so many wonderful stories from the country, from the homestead, from your life with Arthur. Ethan loves to hear them, but what about when he's older? And his children one day? These stories are your treasure." So I began to write. At first, they were just disorganized notes in a notebook Sarah gave me, Random memories, old recipes, country superstitions my mother taught me. But gradually the stories took shape. David gave me a small recorder so I could record my memories when arthritis made it difficult to hold a pen for too long. One day, I found Sarah in the kitchen, silent tears streaming down her face as she listened to one of the recordings. Me recounting the day I met Arthur at a summer festival, how he stepped on my foot during the square dance, and then offered me a piece of zucchini bread as an apology. "Sorry," she said when she noticed my presence. "I was looking for a recipe and ended up listening. It's so beautiful the way you talk about him." I sat next to her at the table. "Love leaves marks on us, Sarah. Some hurt when the person leaves, but most warm the heart on cold nights." She wiped her tears. "Do you think David and I will have stories like that to tell when we're old?" "You already do," I replied with a smile. "Look out the window." Through the glass, in the backyard, David played with Ethan, both laughing as they tried to fly a kite in the weak autumn breeze. This is a story you'll tell one day, about how you almost lost what mattered most, but found the strength to rebuild everything, together. In the spring of 2025, 2 years after the experimental treatment began, what Dr. Thompson called a small miracle of modern medicine happened. Ethan was officially declared free of the disease, not just in remission, but cured. The news came after an exhaustive battery of tests, consultations with specialists, and even a second opinion from a doctor in the United States who reviewed the case remotely. "I can't promise the disease will never return," Dr. Thompson explained during that decisive consultation. "But I can say that, at this moment, Ethan is completely healthy." We left the office floating, as if each step didn't touch the ground. On the way home, we stopped at an ice cream parlor, the first time Ethan could freely have ice cream, without fear of lowering his defenses. His smile as he savored that simple chocolate cone was worth every penny, every tear, every moment of anguish from the past few years. At home, the celebration continued. Martha showed up with a giant cake. Neighbors came to bring hugs and gifts. The phone didn't stop ringing with distant relatives wanting to know details. Amidst the joy, I found a moment to escape to the garden, needing a few minutes of silence to process everything. There he was, our dogwood tree, now a young and vigorous tree, almost as tall as me. "Talking to the tree, Mrs. Peterson?" Dr. Thompson's voice surprised me. I hadn't seen him leave the house. "Plants are good listeners, Doctor," I replied with a smile. "They don't interrupt you with difficult questions." He laughed, approaching to admire the dogwood. "It's an impressive tree. It grew very fast." "Like Ethan. Both are fighters." The doctor nodded, his gaze sweeping over the tree. "You know, when you came into my office 3 years ago, determined to sell everything to pay for your grandson's treatment, I confess I was worried. Not about the treatment, which I believed would work, but about you." "About me? Why?" "Because I saw a woman willing to sacrifice everything for a family that didn't value her. I feared that, even if Ethan got better, you would end up alone, without resources, abandoned again." I smiled, understanding his concern. "You didn't know my family as I did, Doctor. They were lost, afraid. They needed someone to believe in them before they could believe in themselves. You always knew they would change?" I looked at the house, where through the living room window, I could see Ethan laughing as David and Sarah danced to some lively music, Martha clapping along to the rhythm. No, I didn't know. But I knew I would change. And sometimes, Doctor, when a person decides not to bend anymore, all the wind around has to find a new way to blow." He smiled, nodding as if finally understanding something important. "Like the dogwood that grows strong enough to withstand the storm." Exactly. In the end, we didn't sell the homestead just for Ethan's treatment. We sold it to buy our chance to be a real family. That night, after all the guests had left and Ethan was sleeping soundly in his room, I found David and Sarah in the kitchen, finishing up the last batch of dishes. "Leave that for tomorrow," I suggested. "You must be exhausted." "We're almost done," Sarah replied, putting away the last glasses. "You should go rest. It's past midnight." At my age, sleep is like a polite guest. It arrives early but doesn't stay long, I joked, sitting at the table. "I wanted to talk to you both about something." David finished drying his hands and sat across from me, Sarah soon joining us. "Did something happen, Mom?" Concern was evident in his voice. "No, son. I was just thinking. Now that Ethan is well, maybe it's time for me to think about going back to a place of my own." The two exchanged quick glances before David spoke. "You want to leave? Aren't you happy here with us?" "It's not that," I explained gently. "I'm very happy, but I don't want to be a burden to you now that the crisis has passed." "A burden?" Sarah seemed genuinely surprised. "Mrs. Peterson, you're not a burden. You're an essential part of this house now." "That's true, Mom," David agreed, taking my hand across the table. "Ethan would be devastated, and so would we. Unless you really want your independence back." I felt an unexpected emotion overwhelm me. For so long I'd been accustomed to being the intruder, the inconvenient mother-in-law, the mother who meddles where she's not wanted. To hear that I was an essential part of that home was something I never expected. "I don't want to leave," I finally confessed. "I just don't want to impose my presence." "You're not imposing anything," Sarah said, and to my surprise, her eyes were tear-filled. "We want you here. We need you here." David squeezed my hand. "Mom, remember what you told me once? That some broken things don't go back to how they were, but we can build something new with the pieces?" I nodded, remembering the conversation in the hospital cafeteria. "That's what we did," he continued. "We built a new family, better than it was before. And you are its heart." That night, lying in my bed, looking at the ceiling of the room that was now truly mine, I reflected on the journey of the past few years. I thought of the Linda from before, the quiet widow who accepted crumbs of attention, who apologized for existing, who hid to do good. And I thought of the Linda of now, the respected matriarch, the present grandma, the woman who learned that true love doesn't need to hide, that generosity isn't weakness when accompanied by dignity. Through the open window, I could see a sliver of the starry sky, and, in the garden, the silhouette of our dogwood tree, swaying gently in the night breeze. In some years it would bear its first blossoms, golden explosions that would completely transform its appearance. I smiled at the thought. I probably wouldn't be here to see the dogwood in its full glory. But it didn't matter. I had witnessed something equally miraculous, the blooming of a family that almost lost itself, the healing of a grandson who fought bravely, the transformation of a woman who, at 77, finally learned her own worth. Little trees truly are the bravest. They have to fight harder to find the sun, it's true. But when they finally reach the light, Their shade shelters entire generations. And in that moment, as sleep finally came, I realized that was exactly what I had become. Not just a dogwood that grew against all odds, but a tree strong enough to shelter those I love when the storm comes. At 79 years old, I had finally found my springtime.